I still remember standing in our bedroom doorway, watching him fold his favorite flannel shirts, the ones I'd patched at the elbows twice because he couldn't bear to part with them, and feeling as though I was disappearing. "I'm suffocating here, Beth," he said without looking up. "I've given you the best years of my life." As if those years had been a sacrifice, rather than a choice. As if our small farm, with its riot of flowers and humming hives, was a prison, rather than the dream we'd built together. After he left, friends told me I should sell the place. 5 acres is too much for one woman to manage, they said. But this land had become my anchor. When everything else shifted beneath my feet, I could still sink my fingers into soil that knew me, still watch my peonies unfurl each spring with stubborn determination. The farm kept me tethered when grief might have carried me away. I'm telling you all this because you need to understand what 3 years of chosen solitude does to a person, how it reshapes you. I'd grown comfortable in my aloneness, had built rituals around it: morning coffee with the sunrise, classical music in the greenhouse, evening walks along the property line with no one to rush back to. I'd stopped setting the second place at the table. I'd settled into myself, my edges no longer blurred by compromise. That's how June found me. Self-contained, root-bound, not exactly flourishing, but surviving. It was early April, still cold enough for frost warnings, the kind of day where winter and spring argue back and forth until you're wearing 3 layers in the morning and stripping down by noon. I was checking the hives, my mind focused on the delicate art of spring inspection, when a battered blue truck pulled into my driveway, sending the chickens scattering. I didn't get many visitors, especially not unannounced ones. I pulled off my beekeeping veil and made my way down the gentle slope toward the farmhouse, watching as a tall figure unfolded from the driver's seat. From a distance, I thought it was a man. Something about the broad shoulders and the way she moved with such easy confidence. But as she turned toward me and raised a hand in greeting, I saw her clearly. Short-cropped black hair touched with silver at the temples, angular face softened by a half-smile, and the most arresting hazel eyes I'd ever seen. "Bethany Cross!" she called, her voice surprisingly melodic. "That's me," I replied, suddenly conscious of my work jeans with their grass-stained knees, my hair escaping its braid. "I'm June Keller." She extended a hand, and I noticed the calluses, the slight stains around her fingernails. Working hands like mine. "I was told you might have some black walnut you'd be willing to sell. I make acoustic guitars, and I'm looking for tonewood." I'd inherited several acres of woodland with the farm, including a few old black walnut trees that Daniel and I had planned to harvest selectively for furniture making, one of his abandoned passions. "I might," I said, shaking her hand briefly, "though I'm not sure how to price it. I'd be happy to assess what you have and make a fair offer." She smiled then, a crooked grin that revealed a chipped front tooth. "I promise I won't rob you blind." Something about her directness, the way she stood with her weight shifted slightly to one hip, made me curious. "I was about to have some tea after finishing with the bees. Would you like some before we look at the trees?" And so June Keller came into my life, accepting tea in my cluttered kitchen on a Tuesday morning in April, admiring the carved wooden spoons hanging on the wall, my own handiwork, and asking questions about my flowers, as if she were genuinely interested. As we talked, I noticed the rhythmic tap of her fingertips against my pine table, a musician keeping time without conscious thought. "Do you play?" I asked, nodding toward her moving fingers. She glanced down, as if surprised to find her own hand in motion. "Since I was 10. Mostly bluegrass, some folk. Comes with the territory when you make instruments, I guess." "I have an old guitar," I admitted. "I'm not very good, but I love folk music." Her eyes lit up. "Play something for me sometime?" The request held such simple pleasure that I found myself nodding, even though I hadn't played for anyone since Daniel left. It was one of the many small joys I'd tucked away, too tender to expose to empty rooms. After tea, I led her to the wooded edge of my property, our breath visible in the cool air. June moved with easy grace among the trees, occasionally running her hand along a trunk with such gentleness it seemed almost like a caress. When we reached one of the walnut trees, massive, at least 100 years old, she circled it slowly, her expression reverent. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, pressing her palm against the bark. "But I wouldn't cut this one, it's too magnificent." I'd expected a craftswoman eager for materials, not someone who looked at trees the way most people look at art. "There are two that came down in a storm last year," I offered. "Daniel, my ex, had them milled before he left. The lumber's been air drying in the barn." Her eyes met mine, and I saw recognition there. Not pity, but the simple acknowledgement of loss. "That would be perfect, if you're willing to part with it." In the barn, June ran her fingers over the stacked walnut boards, occasionally tapping one to hear its tone. "These are beautiful," she said. "The figure in this wood, it's going to make incredible guitar backs." We negotiated a fair price, and I helped her load several boards into her truck. As she secured the tailgate, she paused. "I'm staying in Burlington for a few days, sourcing materials. Would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? There's a piece I'm particularly interested in, but I'd need to measure it more carefully." I found myself saying yes before I had time to consider why she'd need to return, or why I wanted her to. She came back the next day, and the day after that. The pretense of examining the wood gradually gave way to other reasons. She wanted to see my flower beds. She was curious about my beekeeping. She'd brought her guitar, and wondered if I might like to hear it. Each visit lingered longer than the last, until Saturday evening found us sitting on my porch swing with mason jars of hard cider, watching the sunset paint the distant green mountains in watercolor washes of pink and gold. "This place," June said softly, "it's something special. You can feel the intention in everything, the gardens, the hives, even the way the house sits on the land." "Daniel and I designed it that way," I replied, the name still catching slightly in my throat. "We wanted everything to work together." June didn't flinch at the mention of him, didn't change the subject as most friends did. "And now, it's still evolving, but differently." Her observation startled me. I'd never articulated, even to myself, how the farm had changed since Daniel left, how I'd redirected water flow in the gardens, expanded the cutting flower beds, added new hive stands in places he'd thought too shaded. "Yes," I admitted, "it's becoming something else, something entirely mine." She nodded, sipping her cider thoughtfully. "Creation, destruction, recreation. That's the cycle of making anything worth having." In the deepening twilight, June pulled her guitar from its case, a beautiful instrument of her own making, the walnut back gleaming like liquid amber in the porch light. When she began to play, I felt something long dormant stir inside me. Her fingers moved across the strings with confident precision, drawing out a melody both melancholy and hopeful. It wasn't showy playing, but it held such emotional clarity that I found myself leaning forward, drawn into the sound. When she finished, the night felt too quiet. "That was beautiful," I said. "Did you write it?" "Just now," she admitted, with that crooked smile. "I call it Bethany's Garden." The simple gift of it, music inspired by my small corner of the world, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. June didn't comment on them, just handed me the guitar. "Your turn." I hadn't touched my guitar in months, but my fingers remembered the chords to Wild Mountain Time, a song my mother used to sing. My voice was rusty, uncertain at first, but June hummed along, encouraging me with nods until I found my way into the familiar melody. When we reached the chorus, her voice joined mine, a warm alto that complemented my higher range perfectly, and for the first time in 3 years, music filled the empty spaces of my life again. It was nearly midnight when June finally packed her guitar away. "I have to head back to Connecticut tomorrow," she said, lingering by her truck. "But I'd like to come back for the rest of that walnut, if that's okay." "Of course," I said, suddenly aware of how much I wanted her to return. "You're always welcome." She took a step closer then, her eyes searching mine. "Bethany, I need to be clear about something. I'm not just interested in your wood." The directness of it, the gentle humor in her voice, made me laugh despite the flutter of anxiety in my chest. "What are you interested in, then?" I managed to ask. "You," she said simply. "Your farm, your music, your steady hands, the way you talk to your bees. I'd like to get to know you better, if you're open to that." Standing in my driveway under a canopy of stars, I felt the careful walls I'd built around myself waver. I'm 50 years old, June. I'm set in my ways, and I'm not looking to have my heart broken again. I'm 42, she replied, old enough to know what I want, and young enough to still be brave about wanting it. She reached out slowly, giving me time to step back if I chose, and tucked a stray curl behind my ear. Think about it. I'll call you when I get back to New Haven. I didn't sleep that night, my mind replaying every moment of our conversations, analyzing each glance and gesture. June was beautiful in an unconventional way, thoughtful, talented, and she'd been perfectly clear about her interest. What terrified me wasn't her, but my own response, the way my pulse had quickened when she touched my hair, how I'd already started imagining her in spaces Daniel had once occupied. True to her word, June called when she reached New Haven. Our conversations became a nightly ritual. Me sitting on the porch swing with a cup of tea, her in her workshop surrounded by the tools of her craft. Through the phone, I learned about her life making guitars in a converted warehouse space, her passion for crafting instruments that carried the unique voice of each piece of wood. She told me about her childhood in rural Connecticut, about her grandmother who'd taught her to carve wood, about the treehouse she was building on a friend's property, just because everyone should have a place to escape to. I shared, too, about the early days of the flower farm, my beekeeping mentors, the folk music festivals Daniel and I used to attend before distance grew between us. I told her about finding the note he'd left explaining his departure, how I'd made his favorite dinner that night and eaten it alone, refusing to let good food go to waste even as my world collapsed. What happened with him doesn't define you, June said one night, her voice soft through the phone. It's just part of the story. A significant part, I argued. Only if you let it be the climax instead of the turning point. The following weekend, June returned for the remaining walnut. She arrived early Saturday morning with freshly baked bread from a Burlington bakery and a small carved bird, a chickadee, that perfectly captured the alert curiosity of the tiny birds that visited my feeders. I made this for you, she said, placing it in my palm. I've been thinking about your hands and wanted to make something that would feel right in them. The wood was smooth as silk, the details precise but not fussy. I ran my thumb over the curved back, imagining June bent over her workbench, thinking of me as she shaped it. It's perfect, I said, and meant it. We spent the day together, loading wood in the morning, then walking the boundaries of my property as I pointed out my favorite spots. The bend in the stream where trout sometimes rested, the old maple with a hollow perfect for leaving small treasures, the hilltop where you could see all the way to Lake Champlain on clear days. June listened attentively, occasionally taking my elbow to steady herself on uneven ground, her touch both careful and sure. That evening, after a simple dinner of soup and bread eaten at my kitchen table, June asked if I'd show her how I carved my wooden spoons. We sat on the porch as the spring peepers began their twilight chorus, my hands guiding hers as we shaped a piece of cherry wood. You have to follow the grain, I explained, helping her feel the direction of the wood fibers. Work with it, not against it. Her hands were strong but tentative with the unfamiliar tools. As I guided her through the motions, the warmth of her back against my chest, the scent of cedar and resin that seemed to cling to her skin, filled my senses. When she turned her head slightly, her cheek brushed mine, and we both grew still, caught in the intimacy of the moment. Beth, she said softly, her voice slightly rough, I would very much like to kiss you. I hadn't been kissed in 3 years. Hadn't wanted to be. But now, with June's body warm against mine and the night air cool on my face, I found myself nodding. Yes. She set aside the carving tools carefully before turning to face me, one hand coming up to cup my cheek. Her thumb brushed across my lower lip, a question still lingering in her eyes. I answered by leaning forward and pressing my mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, explorative, then deepened as June's hand slid into my hair, cradling the back of my head. I tasted cinnamon and coffee, felt the slight chap of her lips against mine. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart hammering against my ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. I've been wanting to do that since the first day, when you were talking to your bees, June confessed, her forehead resting against mine. You looked so completely yourself, so at home in your own skin. I laughed softly. I was wearing a ridiculous veil and probably had dirt on my face. Exactly. She smiled that crooked smile that I was growing to crave. Perfectly, Bethany. June stayed that night, though we did nothing more than kiss and talk until dawn crept through the windows. She told me about her last relationship, 8 years with someone who never wanted labels, who kept June at arm's length emotionally while benefiting from her steadfast presence. I finally realized I was the only one building something, she said, her voice quiet in the darkened bedroom. She was just passing through. I understood that feeling all too well. Daniel was always looking toward the horizon, I said. I think he stayed as long as he did because he'd convinced himself I was the one holding him back. Once he admitted it was his own fear keeping him from what he wanted, there was nothing left to blame me for. June's fingers found mine in the darkness, intertwining. Some people don't know how to be where they are, she murmured sleepily, always thinking happiness is somewhere else. In the morning, we drank coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise from the fields. June had to return to New Haven that afternoon, to clients and obligations that couldn't wait. The knowledge of our impending separation hung between us, both more and less consequential than it had been a week ago. Connecticut isn't so far, I said finally. About 4 hours, right? June's smile bloomed slowly. 3 hours and 42 minutes door to door. I timed it. That's very specific. I like to know exactly how far I am from things that matter to me. After she left, the farm felt different. Not empty as it had after Daniel, but full of anticipation, as if the air itself were holding its breath. I found myself humming as I worked in the greenhouse, planning what flowers I would cut for June's next visit, imagining her long frame stretched out on my porch swing. Our relationship developed in weekend increments, June driving up on Friday evenings and reluctantly departing Sunday afternoons. She began bringing her tools, carving alongside me in the evenings, or playing guitar as I prepared dinner. We explored Burlington together, discovering cafes and bookshops, attending small music festivals where we sat with our shoulders touching, sharing a blanket as twilight descended. The physical aspect of our relationship unfolded gradually, each of us careful with the other's vulnerabilities. June was patient, attentive, her craftsman's hands learning my body with the same reverent focus she gave to shaping wood. In her arms, I rediscovered parts of myself I thought had withered away. The ability to laugh during intimate moments, the pleasure of being truly seen and desired. You're so beautiful, she whispered one night, her lips tracing the soft curve of my stomach, the stretch marks from weight gained and lost over decades. When I instinctively moved to cover myself, she gently caught my hands. No, let me see you, all of you. No one had ever looked at me that way, as if my body, with all its imperfections and evidence of life lived, was something to be cherished rather than merely accepted. As spring yielded to summer, June's visits lengthened. She began bringing unfinished guitar parts to work on in my barn, which she'd gradually claimed as a secondary workshop. The scent of sawdust and varnish mingled with the fragrance of my flowers, creating a perfume that would forever after mean home to me. It was during a July heatwave that June first mentioned a more permanent arrangement. We were lying in the shallow part of the stream that cut through my property, the cool water providing blessed relief from the oppressive humidity. I've been thinking, she said, her voice casual, though I felt the tension in her body where it pressed against mine. My lease is up in September. I turned to look at her, water lapping around us. Are you looking for a new place? I'm considering options. She traced a droplet of water along my collarbone. One option being here, with you. Not full-time at first, maybe. I could keep a small workshop in New Haven for client meetings, but do most of my building here. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. That's a big change, June. Your whole business is there. My business is wherever I have my hands and my tools. She sat up, water streaming from her short hair. Look, I know it's soon. We've only known each other a few months, but I'm spending more time on the road than in my shop these days. And when I'm in New Haven, all I think about is when I can get back here. To the farm, I asked, needing clarity. To you, Beth. To you and this place that feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years. She looked around at the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, the riot of summer flowers beyond the stream bank. I could build a proper workshop in the barn. You'd barely know I was here during the day. Until you started playing guitar at midnight, I teased. But my mind was racing ahead. June's clothes hanging beside mine, her tools organized in the barn, morning coffee together becoming routine rather than precious exception. Think about it, she said, leaning down to kiss me briefly. No pressure. I just wanted you to know where my head is. I did think about it, obsessively, in the weeks that followed. I consulted my closest friends, who reminded me that after Daniel left, I'd sworn I'd never share my space again. I made lists of pros and cons, as if love could be quantified in columns. I tried to imagine waking up to June's presence, not just for weekends, but for ordinary Tuesdays and unremarkable Thursdays. In August, I visited June in New Haven, my first time seeing her world instead of her visiting mine. Her workshop occupied the ground floor of an old warehouse, with an apartment above reached by a metal spiral staircase. The space was filled with the tools of her craft, hand planes and chisels hanging in precise order, partially completed guitars in various stages of creation, the air rich with the scent of wood and hide glue. That evening, as we walked along the harbor, I finally gave voice to my deepest fear. What if you change your mind? What if you move to Vermont and realize you've made a terrible mistake? June stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious in the fading light. Beth, I can't promise I'll never change or grow, or that you won't, but I can promise you this. I know what I'm choosing. I'm not running away from something or using you as a placeholder. I want to build a life with you because of who you are, not despite it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, carved from the same walnut she'd bought from me months ago. Inside was a ring, a simple band of silver, with a pattern that echoed the growth rings of a tree. This isn't a proposal, she clarified quickly, or not an official one. It's a promise that I'm serious about us, about making something that lasts. She took the ring out, holding it between us. You don't have to wear it or answer now. Just know that when I say I want to move to Vermont, this is what I mean. I want to grow old watching your flowers bloom, listening to you talk to your bees, making music on your porch when our fingers are too stiff to play as well as they once did. I took the ring, feeling its weight, substantial but not heavy, like June's presence in my life. Ask me again when you've lived through a Vermont winter, I said, but I slipped the ring onto my finger, where it fit perfectly. September brought the practical reality of June's move, renting a small storage space in New Haven for larger tools she couldn't immediately bring north, informing clients of her new location, the actual physical transfer of her life across state lines. My anxiety grew as her arrival date approached. What if the rhythms that worked for us in small doses became unbearable in daily life? The day June's truck pulled into my driveway, now our driveway, I was in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer flowers. I watched her unload the first of many boxes, her movements efficient and purposeful. When she saw me standing among the dahlias, she set down what she was carrying and walked toward me, her long strides eating up the distance between us. Having second thoughts? She asked, direct as always. I looked at her. This woman who had appeared unexpectedly in my life, who had patiently dismantled the walls around my heart with nothing more than honest attention and consistent care. Yes, I admitted. And third thoughts, and fourth. But underneath all of them is the certainty that I want you here. Her smile, that wonderful crooked smile, broke across her face like sunrise. Good. Because I've sublet my apartment to a cellist who plays at all hours, so there's no going back. We laughed then, the tension broken, and I helped her carry her belongings into the house, her clothes into the dresser I'd emptied for her, her books onto shelves I'd cleared, her presence into spaces that had been vacant far too long. That night, lying beside her in what was now truly our bed, I traced the calluses on her palms, the proof of her devotion to her craft. Daniel took so much when he left, I whispered. Not just his presence, but my trust in permanence, my belief that love could be enough. June's fingers interlaced with mine. I'm not asking you to trust permanence, she said softly. Nothing is permanent. Not relationships, not trees, not even mountains given enough time. I'm asking you to trust growth, to believe that what we're building together is strong enough to adapt when change comes, as it always does. In the darkness, I felt the ring on my finger, the promise of a shared future, not despite our individual pasts, but because of them. I do trust that, I said. I trust us. The transition wasn't seamless. June needed absolute quiet while working on instruments. I liked to sing while arranging flowers. She was chronically untidy. I needed order to think clearly. We had our first real argument 2 weeks after she moved in, over something as trivial as where to store the extra firewood. This isn't going to work if you try to control every aspect of our life together, June snapped, frustration evident in the tight line of her jaw. And it isn't going to work if you leave your tools everywhere and expect me to work around them, I fired back. We retreated to separate corners of the house, licking our wounds. Hours later, I found June in the barn, carefully organizing her workbench. I'm sorry, she said before I could speak. You're right. I get so focused on what I'm making that I don't see the chaos I create around me. And I get so caught in my routines that I forget to make space for change, I admitted. Even good change. The real test came when winter arrived. Not the postcard Vermont winter of gentle snowfall and cozy evenings, but the brutal reality of ice storms, power outages, and temperatures so cold the trees cracked like gunshots in the night. June, accustomed to milder Connecticut winters, was unprepared for the relentlessness of it. How many more months of this? She asked in January, huddled near the wood stove as another storm howled outside. At least 3, I replied honestly. Sometimes April still brings snow. I watched her face carefully, looking for regret or doubt, but found only rueful acceptance. Well, at least I can get a lot of work done with no distractions, she said, then added with a sly smile. Except you. We developed winter rituals, June practicing guitar, while I knitted by the fire, weekend trips to the heated greenhouse to surround ourselves with green things, long soaks in the clawfoot tub to ease muscles aching from snow removal. The isolation that had once been my burden became our shared sanctuary, a time to deepen our connection away from the distractions of busier seasons. Spring, when it finally arrived, felt like a collective exhalation. As the first crocuses pushed through melting snow, as the maple sap began to flow, June and I walked the boundaries of our land, planning expansions to the garden, discussing the possibility of adding another hive. She had survived her first Vermont winter, not just intact, but integrated, into the farm, into the local community of artisans, into my life in ways I never thought possible after Daniel's departure. On a warm day in May, exactly 1 year after June's first visit, we sat on the porch swing drinking hard cider from mason jars, just as we had that first evening. The farm was waking around us, fruit trees in blossom, early peonies budding, bees humming as they visited the flowering catmint. I have something to show you, June said, setting down her cider and taking my hand. She led me to the barn, where a sheet covered something large in the corner of her workshop space. With a flourish, she pulled away the fabric to reveal an almost completed guitar, its body shaped from the walnut she'd bought from me, the neck carved from maple that had fallen on our property during a winter storm. It's designed specifically for your hands, she explained, lifting it gently and placing it in my arms. The neck is slightly narrower than standard, the action lower to make fingering easier. And look. She turned it over to show me the back, where she had inlaid a delicate mother-of-pearl bee among the walnut's rich grain. June, I whispered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift, the hours of labor it represented. It's beautiful. Play something, she urged, settling onto her workshop stool. I positioned my fingers on the strings, feeling how perfectly they fit my hand, and began to play Wild Mountain Time, the same song I'd played for June that first night. But this time my voice was stronger, more certain, filling the barn with sound that resonated from wood that had grown on this land, shaped by hands that now tended it with me. When I finished, June was looking at me with such tenderness that my chest ached with the fullness of it all. "I love you, Bethany Cross," she said simply. "Thank you for letting me come home to you." Later that night, as fireflies began their summer dance across the fields, June knelt before me on the porch steps, the wooden box holding the silver ring in her palm. "I promised to ask you again after I'd lived through a Vermont winter," she reminded me. "So I'm asking, will you marry me, Beth? Will you continue building this life with me through all the seasons to come?" 3 years earlier, I had stood in a doorway, watching everything I thought was permanent disappear into luggage and promises of postcards that never came. I had survived that ending, had reshaped myself around absence, had learned to find joy in solitude. But now, looking at June's upturned face gilded by the porch light, I understood that survival wasn't enough. That the true measure of healing is the courage to begin again, to risk wholehearted presence in an impermanent world. "Yes," I said, my voice clear in the spring twilight. "Yes to all of it, the building, the growing, the changing. Yes to making music together, even when our fingers are too stiff to play as well as they once did." As June slipped the ring back onto my finger, where it had actually lived for months already, a whippoorwill called from the darkening woods, its distinctive song both